All right. So um, we went through a couple things last time on like our definitions of folk music, and then I wanted to present some concise definitions, but I couldn't find any concise definitions. And I've already looked through a bunch of historical definitions, and there are some really interesting things in there, and I wanted to present those to you um, today so we can see how these kind of concepts change through history. The first one I want to present is a really, really old, yeah, really, really old encyclopedia. And it is the Riemann lexicon. No, this is the new one. I want this one. All right. Can you see this, the old script German thing? Kati, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. So this is the Riemann lexicon from 1882. This guy, Hugo Riemann, was one of the main musicologists and historians at the time. He put out this huge encyclopedia, and this encyclopedia is still, well, the last print of it wasn't too long ago. They ended up merging with Brockhaus, which is another encyclopedia in Germany. And they put out many, many editions over the decades. This is one of the earliest ones. And their definition, as you can see the old script here, they have a definition of Lied in here. Where is that? Right here. They have a definition of Lied down here. And then they have a definition, a little tiny, itty bitty definition Volkslied down here. And if we zoom in, we can see that they pretty much say the same things we had last time. We have, they say it's either a song that is created within the people, but they also say that the poet and composer are no longer known. So I think this is really interesting that they still assume that it's one composer and one, well, they kind of allude that it's one composer and one poet. And they don't say that it was a composite composition over generations. They just say that it came from the people. It didn't come from or the composer isn't known. Secondly, they have it's in the Volksmund. So what we also said, it's an oral tradition. So it's either something that is anonymous or it's from the oral tradition, or it is a song that is folks-like, volksmäßig. It's schlicht, so it's very simple, and it is easily learned in melody and harmony. But they say that it's composed. So two of these three definitions, they assume that it has a composer, that it is, they compare it then to written music. They don't really even talk about how an oral tradition works. They only think of it in terms of written music, which I think is really interesting. Okay, so then moving on to the Riemann from 1922. The description of Lied is a lot longer, and they go into saying that this description of Lied is just really crazy. It's like, as they keep calling it das echte Lied. So there's like fake songs and there's the real song, and the real song originated some time in Greece, and Schubert found it and made it great, and then ever since then it's been kind of roaming around, waiting to be rediscovered and put into a great form. It's a really weird concept to me. But they also only talk of Lied in terms of compositions. Every time they mention a song, they call it a work or composition, which I also think is really interesting. And then we get down to, let's see, Volkslied. Where is it? Oh, I need to open it. 22 Volkslied, there we go. All right, so the second edition, or this further edition of this same encyclopedia, the definition of Volkslied is a lot longer, as you can see, longer than that little snippet we had before, but most of it is just this bibliography. So all the stuff on this right side over here, is just where you find written down collections of folk songs, which is also really interesting since we think of this as an oral tradition, and they're pointing to all these written versions as folk songs. There's no difference for this person, for this author, between written folk
Sorry,
songs
I'm not
and
sure if we
yeah.
can see this new page.
Oh,
You can show it.
oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you for letting me know. Let's see if I can get that back on. Riemann Volkslied. There we go. Share. Now, can you see it?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, so they have the same exact definition here at the beginning, from the same definition with those three categories from 1882, sorry. But then they go on to say that the regeneration of the real song, whatever that is, this eigentliche Lied, was sometimes found in folk songs, especially when they were based on like troubadours and compositions like that. But not all folk songs contain the real lead. And this is really confusing, to think that there was like this kind of ghost of lead, and it influenced some folk songs, and then it, through the influence in the folk songs, it inspired Schubert to make it into this really great thing. But they really don't say a lot about what makes this real song so great. And then we can move on after the Second World War and see what was going on there. Let's see, which one is this? Oh no, this is still Riemann 22. Okay, so after the war. Oh, and by the way, there is a Riemann lexicon from 1939 or 1936, I think, 1936. And it is totally ideological, like Nazi propaganda. And I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what's in there. Maybe I can find it and we can check it out. Let me see if I can get back to the other one. Okay, so this one is from the 60s in Western Germany. And it was redone in the 70s. Let's see if I can get down to Volksmusik. Right. This one, on the other hand, doesn't really talk about an echte Lied. They only talk about this dichotomy between folk songs and Kunstlieder, so art songs. So there's that really big break between those two. And then they start associating some of the things that we said last time with these two sides. So again, there's the purpose that goes along with the folks song, and everything that's not, doesn't have a purpose, goes along with art songs. So if you look, oh, oops, look over here. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Okay, here they list a bunch of things that folk songs are used for. Exorcisms of demons, songs for what's that? Propagation, harvesting, things
Are
to
we
sing while you're
supposed to
sitting at the
see it?
spinning wheel.
Sorry.
You can't see it?
Oh.
Ah, okay. Hold on. Let's see. Let's see here. There we go. All right, there we go. So this, we have the exorcisms and for the harvest, sitting at the spinning wheel. All these songs are very useful for that. But in here, we also have, Ullstein makes this really clear delineation between cultures that have, is it this one? Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so they talk about how folk music influenced art music, but it is not the same. So there's a big rift between those two things. Okay, can you see this? No. Okay. And then it means I have to switch every single time I want to get a new picture, which is annoying. Where are you? Okay, Riemann, Brockhaus, Riemann, MGG. There we go. Okay, so the MGG, you you're German, you've probably heard of this before. This is Die Musik in Geschichte und Gegenwart. This is also in the video quiz that's up there. We have access to the brand spanking new version, online version, but this one's from 1966. And they go really into detail on this dichotomy between art music and folk music. And they say, let's see if I can change the view here. And they say that cultures that are high culture, which means they have difference between classes in their cultures. So what they say is, for example, German culture is a high culture because it has several different levels of culture. And folk music belongs to the Grundschichten. And I love German for this reason because it's so visual. You have Grund, you have the ground, you have the base, the foundation, and then Schicht is a level. So you have the base layers of society, and folk music is the property of that base layer. So you kind of get this picture that folk music is kind of propping up the music of the upper classes. And let's see here. Right, did I have anything else in here that was, I think so, down here, yeah. They also point out a couple different quotes from different ethnomusicologists, like Viora. He was one in Austria. This is written by a guy named Supan, which is another important ethnomusicologist in the German-speaking world. But of course, they're quoting things from like 1939, and I thought that was really fitting, since that's the year that Germany invaded Poland. We have this quote: Wir haben im Verlauf unserer Forschung gelernt, dass wir, die Entwicklung einer Volksballade zu übersehen, mehr noch, als wir zunächst getan haben, über die Grenzen der germanischen Völker hinausgreifen und das gesamte Europagebiet berücksichtigen müssen. Denn sowohl einzelne Motive wie in vielen Fällen auch das ihnen zusammengefügte Lieder sind meist im Gemeingut der europäischen Völker und auch verschiedenste Weise von einem zu anderen gewandert. So what they're saying is that Volkslied, in contrast to what they thought in the 19th century, is not just a German thing. And I forgot to show you this, but in the other encyclopedias, the earlier encyclopedias, when they're talking about Volkslied and Lied, the bibliography is specifically German. And we'll talk about this more when we're talking about Wagner, that Volkslied, especially the good kind, the echte Lied, it was specifically German. And other people had other ones, but they weren't as good because composers couldn't use them as much, which, as we know now, is complete crap. But this is kind of what was going on at the time. And these folks said, no, this is a European thing. And the motives in these Volkslieders, they have moved around Europe and they have lots in common. And in 1939, you can tell that this could have been kind of used as kind of a thought that the German heart should be common across Europe. Ooh, it's a little cringy. But they do have another thing down here that I really like, and this will come up again and again. And so this is a really important thing to think about because, yeah, a lot of people have talked about this. We'll take a look. This understanding that there's a first existence, they're talking about a zweite Dasein, a second existence. And the second existence is the folk music that is written down in literary existence, form of existence. So if we think about folk music as a practice, then we have the literary version, the written form, the academic form, and a lot of that can be made into art songs and symphonies and be discussed in academia, so that there's these two kinds of folk songs going on at the same time. We have the folk song, the practice, the oral traditions that are not written down, and then we have the written down part, which is the art song, the artistic the composed, written down version. All right, so let me get back and we'll see what was going on the other side of the Iron Curtain at the same time. This one, where is it? This one is from 1966, so the same year as the MGG, but it's from East Germany. And anyone who's familiar with socialist realism knows that folk music was a huge thing because of this assumption that folk music was the property of the Grundschicht, the base layers of society. And of course, in Eastern ideology, the worker class, the working class, was the ruling class. So their music was the most important. And that was the one that needed to be pushed and championed, which is what my dissertation is about, by the way, the production of folk songs for the people. And the problems that that kind of made. So they also agree that folk songs, they talk about Herda. They also agree that it is simple, it's traditional, it is in the oral tradition, it's passed on orally. And then they contrast it to the artistic work of a composer and a poet. And then they talk about Herda, which we will also talk about. And they go into quoting, they put it in quotes, the echte folk song. And then they quote again this Eigengut der sozialen Grundschichten. They're quoting now the other encyclopedias. And then they also quote this guy Viola again. But then they say, oh yeah, in Marxist view, because of course this is East Germany, this is a good thing that the songs belong to the Grundschichten, and they reflect a community, a collective attitude of music writing and music practice that is favorable in the East. All right. And they also point out here these two kind of definitions of Lied. They have the Genitiven, which is what this first existence, this anonymous kind of organic creation. And then they have the second thing, the volkstümliche Lied, which is composed, which is this second kind of folk song. So at the beginning, we have these three things. It could be, you know, an anonymous composition. It could be an oral tradition. It could be something that's written simply. That's the first definition we saw in the 1800s. And then this definition is closer to what is kind of defined today. We have just two. We have the oral traditions and we have written traditions that might be based on those oral traditions. So in this class, we're concentrating on the second kind, the written traditions that are based on idioms out of this oral tradition. So that separation is really important for our class. Okay, so later on, where are you? Stop. Okay, later on in the 70s, we have another version of the Riemann lexicon. And this is done by a really famous musicologist called Dalhaus. You might have heard this name before. He's a really famous music philosopher guy in the 20th century. This guy here. And so he goes into the Lied, talking about, yeah, it should be simple, but it's not always simple because we have a lot of other things. And he goes in how complicated it is to actually define a Lied. Is it sung? Is it not? Is it simple? Is it with orchestra? Is it with piano? And he says how complicated it is. However, he says it is important to separate, again, this functional song, so funktionsgebundene, so songs that are done for a purpose, so folk songs, and or political songs, for example, church songs. He lumps those all together. And then he separates them from the romantic art song, which is, where does he say? He says more or less purposeless. Ja, zweckfrei. Mehr oder weniger zweckfrei. So he makes a difference between purposeless songs and purposeful songs. So songs you do while doing something or that are applied to something, and songs that are purposeless. Now, I disagree with this. I think all songs have a purpose, but I didn't live in the 70s. I'm not a musicologist from the 70s. I'm a child of the postmodern era. So I disagree with that, but you can get your own opinion about that. So those are some definitions from the previous century. Some more things were going on in the 50s and 60s in ethnomusicology, and I wanted to point out some of the important people in that before we move on to the birth of ethnomusicology with Herder, and that is from this guy, Lomax. This guy did a lot of work. He was working in the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. He was one of the first ethnomusicologists in the United States. He went around and recorded a bunch of things, not only nice little folk songs in the mountains, but he went into prisons, he went into all kinds of social situations to record their songs. And if you're a folk person at all, I can very much recommend a singer. His name is Lead Belly. What is his last name? Oh, Lead Belly. I'll write it down. And Lomax went and recorded a bunch of things of his while he was in prison, and that's a huge part of American folk culture in there. So this guy in the 50s was like, no, it's totally different than what you think. It has nothing to do with written music. It is something completely different. Traditions of folk and primitive music may stand for formative emotional patterns that have persisted and affected human behavior. They are like musical languages. And then he quotes Charles Seeger. I don't know if anybody has heard of Pete Seeger, was a big figure in the folk revival in the 60s, and also had a lot of influence in East Germany. And Charles Seeger, I think it was his father, says the Occidental, so Western, notation system is a set of directions for reproduction of products so as to conform to the particular traditions of the Occidental fine art. So again, we have this fine art, folk art kind of dichotomy. When therefore we notate in it a product of the traditions of folk art, the act is one of translation from one idiom to another. So he says the Western notation system is a tradition and folk art is another tradition. And when we write down folk music in this tradition, we are translating as if we were translating a language into one language into another. The notated folk sonnet is then not a primary but a secondary datum of study. So again, we have this first and second versions of folk songs. Employment of specific symbols to indicate deviations, blah, blah, blah. Not traditional fine art may increase the accuracy of the translation, but it may lull the student into the illusion that it is not a translation. And I think that is a really cool sentence there, that a lot of us, that we are students of folk music, we learn folk music from notation that we learned from, the Western art music tradition, and we can be fooled into thinking that that's the real thing, but it's actually just a translation of a practice that is not written down. All right, so I think that is all the points I wanted to get in with those kind of stuff. And then we're going to read a little snippet of the Grove Dictionary definition of folks music and see how they get in that. And I'll stop the recording now.